Hey everyone, Ragnarok here, back with my fourth game from the tournament last weekend with the U.S. Amateur event, the chess event in North Jersey. And this was a game where I was playing as black and I was playing what's known as the King's Indian. Just to show the first two moves, d4, which is the queen's pawn opening. Any response that starts with the knight going to f6 is known as one of the Indian defenses. There's a lot of different ones, the main ones being, let's just say, he pushes here. Going here with g6 is going to start the King's Indian. And let's say I go with e6, it's going to start the Nimzo Indian, where the bishop wants to come out to the b4 square. And let's just say I go to b6, this is known as the Queen's Indian, where the bishop wants to come here with a fianchetto and attack on the king side. So there's a couple different variations here in the Indian. There's a couple others as well. Check out my website, ragchess.com. I'll put the link in the description below so that you can see the specific article where I talk about a lot of different openings. And you can kind of decide from there if there's one that you want to look a little bit further at, where I discuss the ideas of them. So this is the King's Indian, where he goes a little bit different the way he plays it, but I'm going to talk to the first few moves of the main idea and kind of why I like it. So he goes to g3, I go g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, and then attack on the center with the e4. He's defending it, so I can't take with my knight. And then I go to d6, and this is standard King's Indian. Now, the cool thing about this, if you're completely unsure how to play against d4, the queen's pawn opening, King's Indian's really nice to learn from because there's no variations I can think of. Well, there's probably one. I'll explain it. Because almost anything that he did in my first, what we're on move 4 now, I was going to get this formation here. Everything here is almost exactly the same. No matter how far he pushes his pawns in that time, I'm going to get this formation, and it's really nice. So it's nice to know your first few moves pretty much no matter what he does. Now, the exception would be, let's say at this point, when I go there, what's called the Trumpowski attack, where he brings his bishop to g6. That's actually one move further behind that, so this pawn's not there. Because in that other scenario, I would have just brought my bishop up, I'd be fine. But in this attack, it's a different type of attack. We're not going to go over it today, but just be aware that this is probably the only thing I've seen where you're not going to do those first few moves for the King's Indian. And the idea is because if you start to push, you know, he could take, and then he's kind of like ruining your king side. So that's really the only move I can think of. And let's just go back to the game. It's always just going to be knight f6, g6, bishop g7, and then once he pushes this e4 pawn, then you go to e6. If he didn't push that, if he did like c4 instead, you could safely castle there, and then once he pushes there, you want to go with d6. So slightly out of order, let me go back to the actual game here. d6, his knight ended up coming to e2 because his whole goal when he castles, kind of like a weird King's Indian for white, where he wants to push this pawn. Really, in the King's Indian, I'll castle, he'll castle. My goal is to move this knight out of the way. Maybe here, maybe back to e1, maybe over here in some cases. In this case, I believe I do go there. But I ultimately want to push f4. And you're going to create a rigid structure in the middle, which we'll see as this game kind of starts to unfold. So I push e4 at this point. So he could take back, I could take back, we could trade queens. You know, it'd just be a normal game. Queens are off the board. I would eventually try to move this piece, start to push forward, so that way my bishop has eye on the a8, a1 square for the rook. So that would be the idea there. But most people don't really take if you push e5. A lot of people will play as he played, which is d5. And you'll start to notice that once these pawns here are like solid, like nothing's going to move them for a while, you can start to create your plan. Because at this point, it's kind of uncertain. Like, he could do something else and I could take. You know, this is just a completely different game than it is in the game that we were in, where he pushes d5. So now I've got to create some other alternative strategies. But you'll notice one thing. When he was on d5, he was protecting the c5 square. So now that he's not, as soon as he does that, I bring my knight out to a6. And again, it is a weird move if you're following my other guides about basic principles. In the opening, you might say, like, you know, Ragnarok, you always say don't bring the knight out to the side, because if you think about it, he's only got 4 squares he can go to. He's much better in the center. But at the same token, if I were to come here, my knight's only real move, if he moves somewhere, is to go to b6. Like, you know, so it's really, there's no point in him being there. He really doesn't want to be there. So the main point about this, and in that case, I actually could, no, yeah, because, yeah, if I were on b6, I mean, what am I going to do? Go to this square? There's really nothing I can do. I'm not going to attack these pawns. So it's a better approach when you go with a6, because in this scenario, d5 has been pushed, or d4 has been pushed to d5. So he's no longer attacking this piece, this square, defending it. So I'm going to get my knight there. Why? Because, well, I'll have two knights attacking the e4 square, and it's not easy for him to kick me away, as you'll see in a move. So he pushes c4, and this just makes it even better. My knight really wants to be right there. So I go there. Once you're on c5, d5 can no longer, or the d pawn can no longer push you away. The only pawn that can push you would be the b pawn. So if you were to push it right now, though, I would take this pawn and I'd be up a pawn. Because I'm defended with my knight, and he's not going to trade away his fianchetto bishop, not so easily anyway. So because of that, it forces his next move. He's got to defend this pawn, so he brings his knight out to c3. And then standard, this is really what you want to accomplish. Try to go towards this formation if you're playing this opening. Push the a5 pawn, because he no longer can push b5, and it's kind of going to take some time for him to push it. He'll have to do this, and then eventually push this pawn. But he would have to defend his pieces first, so let's just say I do a couple random moves. He can't go here right away, because if we trade, I'm going to get his rook. So he kind of has to slow play it over here. And the main goal, I'll back up 1 second, of the King's Indian is a kingside attack for black, which is why I want to push this f5 pawn. White's plan usually is a queenside attack. So the fact that he has to go like this, maybe bring, I'm just going to do random moves, maybe bring the bishop up, and then eventually push this pawn, it takes him a lot longer to accomplish his main goal of going with the queenside attack. So that's why establishing your foothold here with a5 is really, really strong. I mean, this knight cannot be moved easily. So the best way he sees, I guess, to get rid of that knight is to bring his bishop onto e3. And this is a natural square for white in the King's Indian. So I bring my knight back here. The problem with this, I did a little bit of analysis afterwards. I like it because if he takes, I'm going to take back with the knight. However, he is probably not going to give up that bishop because that's King's Indian. This black bishop is eventually going to be a monster once I get this pawn out of the way, which you'll see. So for him to trade off that piece, which could attack my bishop, or trade for it for a piece that's not going to be as beneficial later on, it would be a mistake. So that's why he doesn't take, and that's why you shouldn't take if you're white. Even if this piece isn't here. Let's say I go back here. Trading this bishop, yes, I get weird pawns for a little bit, but the game's still early, and I still have this strong bishop, which can't be taken easily now. So if we go back, I did go to my knight on f, went to d7. Again, trying to get this knight out of the way because I want to push f5. Now he pushed f4, which was weird to me. So the way it went down, it was in my favor. I wasn't sure exactly what to do, so I pushed f5 back. But if we back up a second, and this is just a lesson that I learned recently from a chess master I was studying with, if the position is not fixed, so like when you think of pawns, like these are fixed, like they can't move easily. So don't do a move like f4, f5, c5, c4, basically these four squares, to attack the center and create this, because these pawns are not fixed. Anything can really happen. I mean, this could take here, this could take here. It just creates a lot of uncertainty, especially if you're in a game where you're unsure right away because you have less time. You don't really want to do that. It creates a lot of different variations. You want to focus on an attack. So solidify this first, because here, the best move for him is to take back. And now I've got this pawn isolated because my bishop is blocked. And then once he takes here, I've got this isolated pawn, and my g-file is semi-open for my black king. So this would have been better for him here, but it didn't go that way. So that's something I learned after the game. I wanted to share that with you guys. But with these four pawns here, he makes a mistake actually, and he takes with this pawn. I think his goal was to open up the f-file, which is, you know, my goal too, because now if you think about it, this pawn is gone. I'm not going to take back with this pawn because my whole point of f5 was to be able to allow my bishop out. So I take back with knight, because now if he takes back, I can take back with bishop, and this is very strong for me. So he's not going to take back right now. So his next move is actually to push this pawn, which was kind of forced, because if he didn't do that, I have this pawn hanging right now. And I don't really see an easy way, or any way really, to defend that pawn. So I've kind of forced it. A lot of my moves have been forced on him, which is cool, except for that e takes, or f takes e5. So b3, why is that awesome? Because all I have to do is get this knight out of the way, and I've got this monster attacking, pinning this knight, but attacking this rook, which is really key in the King's Indian opening, which is nice. That's why I really want to share this game first, because everything kind of went my way. So I take here with my knight. His knight takes back. Again, he just removed that pin. Now all I have to do is move this with check, but I don't want to do it yet. And then my pawn takes. This pawn is so strong. Like, you'll see, like, it's so tough for him to really break it. Because if he takes back right now, I've got some ideas. Like, this is an attack on his bishop, and I'm attacking his rook. So just the power of this bishop, once everything opens up, is really, really nice. So he can't take that pawn back yet. So he just takes my rook. I take with queen, which seems weird, but I've got my eye now on potentially bringing my knight here. Maybe I eventually bring my rook over and double them up, and I've got this square if I can get rid of that bishop. So he has to kind of block that, because my knight is kind of threatening to come in here, discover attack on the rook. So he comes in here with his knight to block it. I bring my knight to g4. The engine actually doesn't like this move at all, but I thought it was pretty good because I really want to trade this off. He can't take the knight because it's defended by the bishop, and I want to get rid of his dark squared bishop. So why did he go there and not just move the bishop? Because again, like I said earlier, this bishop is defending this here. If he goes back, for example, well, he's just dropping a knight. King has to move, and now I'm threatening check, forking the king and queen. In addition, double attack on this rook, so he's going to lose a piece. So he can't move that bishop off. So he kind of has to do something else. Again, another forcing move, which is really that's how you know you're doing really well in chess, when you can force every of your opponent's moves. It's really nice. So queen comes here, I trade that off, and now see if you see the really good move here. Queen comes up to f6. Double attack on here. Knight can't move because the rook is hanging. I'm creating more space now that my rook can come over and potentially have more attacks on this square here. And the knight's pinned. The queen kind of has to hold it. So his only move at this point, again, forced move, is to go to rook d1. He alleviates the pin, and he's got two attackers. The problem now, though, is that this knight, I mean, he can move now, but this rook and queen, or sorry, queen and rook can't, because they have to defend it. I've got two attackers, he has two defenders. So he has to move his knight next. But I'm just blocking his time. I bring my rook up here. I think at this point, maybe he could have come here. The problem with that, though, is I think I would probably just go here and defend this pawn. I think that's probably it. Queen can't take, knight. Yeah, I mean, it looks pretty good for me. So he just comes off, and this is another tactic. The fact that he's off the back rack now, once this knight moves, I've got potential check ideas coming back here. And then my rook can slide over with potential check on the king if he decides to move into the f file. So moving the rook off the back rank was part of my plan. Now I just defend this pawn. He's only down one pawn, but he hasn't had a chance to take this pawn at all, which is really, really good for me. So I've got some ideas now. All I really want to do is kind of see what he does. He's got so much pressure that he has to alleviate it, so he moves his knight. Oh no, he moves the bishop, gets me to move first. So the main point of this move is if I move back here, he's going to force me off, potentially opening his king side, so maybe that would have been pretty good for me. But I don't really want to do that, so, and plus he could probably just take here. But this is still really good for me. Potentially checking down here. I've got a pass pawn. It's definitely would have been a good game, but I bring my bishop back here because if this pawn ever gets gets traded, like he could probably take it back at some point. I want to make sure my bishop is defending my rook because the queen could come here. So just as an example, let me show you what I mean. If I came back with a bad move like here and he took, if this is off here, he could take with check and then get my rook. So that's the idea. Now I know it's a couple moves. I have to make some bad moves for that to happen, but that kind of limits my movement. I can't move this pawn easily because of that idea. So I didn't want to have that happen. I wanted to make sure my rook was at least defended, so if he did do that check, he can't take my rook for free. So that was the idea there. He moves his knight, which he had to do. And my move here, again, the engine doesn't like this, but I go g5. Yes, if he does take here, he has that check idea I was talking about. But my main goal here is to just keep restricting his pieces if I can. His knight can't move forward. That was my whole point. But he makes probably the biggest blunder of the game, pushing g4. And why is this a blunder? We'll just kind of think about it real quick. Think real quick, and then I'll explain why. So I have this awesome move here of check. But not only that, let's say the king comes off, which he didn't do in the game. This is just massive, nice file, an awesome file for me to control. Maybe not right away, but it's just so strong. Oh no, yeah, this would be good because he has to block. And then I have this fork here, or this pin on the queen and rook. So he allowed that to happen with g4. So especially when you're fianchettoed, I mean, everything's open already on this side. So weakening yourself like that, it was really a big mistake from him. But if we go back to the game, he actually blocked with the bishop, and he did it really quickly. But take a look at the next few moves, kind of see how white or black can go up a piece. I thought this was a really nice tactic. All right, well, let's see if you found it. Rook goes to f1 for f8 first, because now you've got two pieces attacking here. This rook is off the file. He can't come back to block. This knight can't block anything, and the queen can't go anywhere to defend that. So his only move is to bring the knight to g3, and the follow-up from that for the tactic is to bring your rook into f3, attacking both the queen and the knight. He is forced to take this pawn, and I go up a piece, which is really awesome. This guy was rated about 1760, and he actually probably the worst sportsmanship I've ever seen. He didn't shake my hand when the game was over. He sat there. I'll show you the end where I was 3 moves, I think, away from checkmating him, and he just kind of sat there, didn't say anything, looked at his partner, his teammates' games for about 20 minutes. I sat there just waiting for him, and then he just grabbed his clock and walked away. So don't do that ever if you're playing in a tournament. Just resign if you lose. I mean, everybody loses. It's part of the game. So totally crazy. And it's funny that the game I showed you last week, the guy was 1200. He was a kid. He was probably like 12 years old. He handled that loss a lot better than this guy did, who was probably in his 20s. So interesting. But let's just continue with the game. He comes out with his king. Now, this is probably a blunder at the point. I actually thought this guy was rated 2000, so I just wanted to go slow, trade queens. But the best move here is to bring your bishop in. There's no way this queen's penetrating anything down here. If he does, well, he can't even try to attack this piece because these bishops are so strong. That is the right move, but just to play it safe, I brought my queen in, try to trade queens. But I have to be careful here because if I allow him, let's say, to do this, he could take my queen. No, even still at this point. Yeah, this rook's not hanging. I don't know what I was worried about. I think I was really nervous about that. I think it was, if I take here? I don't know. I was nervous about something in the game, so I just moved my rook away from the king. I don't know why, now that I'm looking at it again. But then I just trade queens, which again, the engine says is a blunder because I have a nice queen, doing really strong here, but I'll just show you the rest of the game. My whole point now is to bring this bishop here, here, and here, because if you remember from the last game, I had the same diagonal for both bishops, and it's really, really limiting for him. So I start slowly bringing my bishop around his rook. I mean, he can't really do anything. Check, and then there's the bishop check. He has to block with bishop. Anything else would have been just some discovered nastiness. So even check, anything really. So he blocks here, nice little tactic. You can take the pawn with check. Bishop cannot take back here because he's pinned. So he has to move, bring the pin back on, and then just trade everything away. And then from here, it's just a matter of pushing your pawn to bring your king around, because now I've got this passed pawn. So if we back up, just endgame tactics. Get this pawn out of the way, push this pawn, and then once you have just this pawn, get him ready to move up. Don't even worry about the queen side pieces. So yeah, I'll go to the end. Start pushing, get your pawn up there. He sat there for 20 minutes, not even kidding. Totally unsportsmanlike. So do not be that guy. Totally just shake your opponent's hand, learn from it, see what you can. But that was game 1 of 2 for the King's Indian I'm going to talk about over the next few weeks, and I do want to make this one of my guides that I write more specifically about. So I briefly talked about the main ideas, but there's a lot of different things that can happen. As long as you have those ideas in your head of what you want to accomplish, you'll be better off. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. We're going to do another King's Indian next Monday, and I will see you in the next video, but make sure you subscribe before you leave if you haven't already. I'll see you guys next week.